The worst gardening decision I ever made cost me an entire season, not because of a late frost, not because of pests, not because I chose the wrong varieties. It cost me an entire season because I did what almost every excited gardener does in April. I walked outside on the first warm morning, looked at my empty beds, and I planted. And 2 weeks later, every single seedling I had been nurturing indoors since January was stunted, yellowing, and barely alive. And I spent the rest of that summer watching my neighbors harvest tomatoes while I waited for plants that never caught up. Because the problem was not what I planted, the problem was what I planted into. That year taught me something that changed every garden I have grown since, that the most important work you do in April has nothing to do with seeds. It has nothing to do with transplants. And it has nothing to do with what crops you choose. The most important work you do in April is understanding your soil. Because your soil in April is not the same soil you had in September. And it is not the same soil you will need in June. And if you plant into April soil without fixing these 5 critical mistakes first, you will spend the next 6 months fighting a losing battle against poor germination, weak root development, nutrient deficiencies, waterlogging, and disease. And the cruelest part is that most gardeners never connect the dots. They blame the seeds, they blame the weather, they blame the variety. They never blame the soil they planted into in April before it was ready. Today, I am going to walk you through the 5 soil mistakes that are destroying April gardens right now. And I am going to give you the exact fixes that John Seymour, the greatest self-sufficiency gardener who ever wrote, used to prepare soil that produced abundant harvests for decades. These are not complicated. They are not expensive, but they require you to do something that is genuinely difficult for an enthusiastic April gardener. They require you to slow down, and to understand that in gardening, the preparation you do before you plant always determines what happens after you plant. Mistake number 1 is planting into soil that is too cold. I know that sounds obvious. I know you have heard it before. But here is what nobody tells you. Cold soil is not just an inconvenience. Cold soil is a biological shutdown. Because your garden soil is not just dirt, it is a living ecosystem of billions of bacteria, fungi, nematodes, and invertebrates that are responsible for breaking down organic matter, releasing nutrients, and making those nutrients available to your plants. And this entire ecosystem runs on temperature. When the soil temperature drops below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, soil bacteria slow down dramatically. When it drops below 45 degrees, fungal activity nearly stops. And when it drops below 40 degrees, the mycorrhizal fungi that form the essential partnership with most plant roots, delivering water and nutrients in exchange for sugars, go almost completely dormant. And this is the critical point that most April gardeners completely miss. Your seedlings need soil life, not just soil warmth. You can plant a tomato transplant into 55-degree soil, and it will technically survive. But it will not thrive. Because the soil life that should be delivering phosphorus, potassium, and micronutrients to those roots is barely functioning. And so the plant sits, it looks alive, the leaves stay green for a while. But it is not growing. It is just waiting. And every week it waits is a week of growing season lost. Here is how Seymour approached this. He used what he called a soil thermometer, which is exactly what it sounds like, a thermometer you push into the soil to measure the actual temperature 4 inches below the surface. And his rule was simple. You do not plant any warm season crop until the soil at 4 inches reads a consistent 60 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 7 consecutive days. Not the air temperature, not the forecast. The soil temperature at 4 inches for 7 consecutive days. And the reason he insisted on 7 days is that soil temperature fluctuates. You can have 3 warm days in April that push the soil to 62 degrees, and then 2 cold nights that drop it back to 48 degrees. And if you planted during that warm window, your seedlings are now sitting in 48-degree soil with dormant soil biology. And they will struggle for weeks before the soil warms back up. The fix for cold soil is simple, but requires patience. First, stop planting warm season crops until the soil thermometer confirms 60 degrees for a week. Second, use black polythene or black landscape fabric laid flat on the beds 2 weeks before you intend to plant. The black surface absorbs solar radiation and can raise soil temperature by as much as 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Compared to bare soil, third, if you have a cold frame or low polytunnel, use it to pre-warm the beds before transplanting. The air inside a cold frame can raise soil temperature by 8 to 12 degrees over bare outdoor beds. And fourth, mulch around your transplants immediately after planting with a thin layer of compost rather than straw or wood chips, because dark-colored compost absorbs heat while light-colored mulches reflect it. And this one shift, from planting by the calendar to planting by the soil thermometer, is the single most impactful change you can make to your April gardening. Because a tomato transplanted into 62-degree biologically active soil on May 10th will outproduce a tomato transplanted into 50-degree dormant soil on April 15th by the end of the season every single time. Mistake number 2 is working soil that is too wet. And this is the mistake that does the most long-term damage. Because unlike cold soil, which recovers completely when it warms up, compacted soil from premature cultivation can take years to recover. Here is the test that Seymour taught and that every serious gardener needs to do before touching their soil in spring. You take a handful of soil from about 3 inches below the surface, you squeeze it firmly in your fist, and then you open your hand and poke the soil ball with your finger. If it crumbles, the soil is ready to work. If it stays in a sticky, compressed ball, it is too wet. And if you cultivate wet soil, if you dig it, rototill it, or even walk on it, you are destroying the pore structure that took years to build. Healthy soil is roughly 50% solid material and 50% pore space. And that pore space is not empty. It is full of air and water, in a balance that plant roots need to thrive. Roots need oxygen, they need water, but they need them in a ratio, not one or the other. And when you compact wet soil, you collapse those pores, you eliminate the air channels. You create dense airless zones where roots cannot penetrate, and where the anaerobic bacteria that cause root rot thrive. And once you have compacted a bed by walking on it or tilling it when wet, restoring that structure takes 3 to 5 years of careful management, worm activity, and root action. Seymour was emphatic about this. He said the golden rule of soil management is that you never walk on cultivated land and you never work wet soil. And the way he enforced this in his own garden was by building beds narrow enough that he could reach the center from either side without stepping in. A maximum of 4 feet wide for a bed you reach from both sides, and by using planks laid on the paths between beds to distribute his weight on the paths and never setting foot on the bed itself. The fix is threefold. First, do the squeeze test before you work your soil this April. And if it fails, wait. 1 week of patience now prevents 3 years of struggling with compacted soil. Second, if your beds are already compacted from years of foot traffic, do not try to solve this with a rototiller. Mechanical tillage is the worst thing you can do to compacted wet soil because it creates a hard pan, a dense impermeable layer just below the depth of the tiller tines that water cannot penetrate and roots cannot break through. Instead, use a broad fork pushed straight down and lever gently to crack the soil vertically without inverting the layers. This opens the pore structure without destroying the soil profile. And third, if you have no dig beds, lay a 2-inch dressing of compost on the surface right now in early April and let the worms pull it down. No dig compost dressing adds organic matter, improves drainage, and builds soil structure from the top down without you ever touching the soil at all. Mistake number 3 is adding the wrong things to the soil in the wrong order. This is the mistake that gardeners who actually care about soil improvement make most often. Because they know that adding organic matter is good, they know that compost improves soil structure, they know that manure adds fertility. And so they go out in April and they pile everything on at once: compost, manure, lime, wood ash, blood meal, bone meal, and whatever else they have been accumulating over winter. And then they are confused when their plants still struggle, because the order and timing of soil amendments matter enormously, and getting them wrong can actually make your soil worse. Here is the specific problem that Seymour identified that almost no modern gardening guide discusses. Lime and manure must never be applied to the same bed at the same time, because lime is alkaline, and manure in its fresh or semi-composted state contains ammonium. And when you combine an alkaline substance with ammonium, you trigger a chemical reaction that converts the ammonium into ammonia gas, which evaporates into the air and takes all that nitrogen with it. The nitrogen you were trying to add to your soil literally disappears into the atmosphere within days of application. And this is why gardeners who apply lime and manure together in spring always wonder why their heavily amended beds are still nitrogen deficient. Seymour's system was specific. You apply lime in autumn after clearing the previous crop, and you apply manure in spring at least 4 weeks before planting. Never the same season, never in the same week, and definitely never at the same time. The second order mistake is applying fresh manure directly before planting. Fresh manure, meaning manure that has not been composted for at least 6 months, contains nitrogen in forms that are too concentrated for direct root contact. It can burn roots, it can introduce pathogens like E. coli that contaminate edible crops, and it creates a surge of bacterial activity in the soil that temporarily locks up nutrients rather than releasing them. The fix is to use only well-rotted compost or aged manure for any amendment you apply in April within 6 weeks of planting. Well-rotted means it smells like earth, not like a barn. It means the original materials are unrecognizable. It means the temperature in the pile has been above 130 degrees Fahrenheit, long enough to kill pathogens and weed seeds. And here is the simple amendment sequence that Seymour used. Lime in autumn at a rate of roughly 4 ounces per square yard on acidic soil, based on a soil pH test. Well-rotted manure or compost in early spring at a rate of 1 full wheelbarrow load per 10 square yards, spread on the surface and either worked in lightly or left as a no-dig surface dressing, and nothing else. Because Seymour believed that healthy soil does not need a cabinet full of supplements. It needs organic matter, drainage, and the right pH. And if you get those 3 right, the soil biology does the rest. Mistake number 4 is ignoring pH, which is the single most misunderstood number in gardening. Most gardeners have heard that soil pH matters, and most gardeners have never actually tested their soil pH. And the ones who have tested it often do not understand what the number means or how to act on it. So let me explain this in practical terms. Soil pH is a scale from 0 to 14 that measures how acidic or alkaline your soil is. 7 is neutral. Below 7 is acidic. Above 7 is alkaline, and the reason it matters is not just about what nutrients are in your soil, it is about what nutrients are available to your plants. Because at different pH levels, different nutrients become chemically locked or unlocked. And this is where the April mistake happens. Gardeners look at their plants turning yellow and assume they need more nitrogen, so they add blood meal or a nitrogen fertilizer. And the plants still turn yellow. Because the problem was never a nitrogen deficiency, the problem was a pH problem. At a soil pH below 6, aluminum and manganese become soluble and toxic to plants. Phosphorus becomes locked up and unavailable, even if there is plenty of it in the soil. And calcium and magnesium become deficient. And at a pH above 7.5, iron, manganese, zinc, copper and boron all become unavailable even if the soil contains adequate quantities of all of them. This is why a plant growing in pH 5 soil can show every symptom of nutrient deficiency while sitting in a bed that was heavily fertilized the previous season. The nutrients are there, but the soil chemistry is locking them away. Most vegetables grow best in a pH range of 6.0 to 6.8. This is the sweet spot where most nutrients are available, where soil bacteria are most active, and where earthworms thrive. Below 6, you need to raise pH with lime. Above 7, you need to lower it with sulfur or by adding large quantities of acidic organic matter like pine needle mulch or peat moss. The fix is to buy a soil pH test kit at the start of every growing season. They cost around $10 to $15 and take 10 minutes to use. Test 3 or 4 samples from different parts of your garden and average the results. If your pH is below 6.0, apply ground limestone at a rate of 4 to 8 ounces per square yard, depending on how far below 6 your reading is. And remember what we covered in mistake 3. Apply lime now and wait at least 4 weeks before applying manure. If your pH is above 7.0, the correction is slower and harder. The most effective method is adding large quantities of composted pine bark or sulfur, but this can take multiple seasons to shift significantly. Seymour's view was that most garden soils in temperate climates tend toward acidity over time as rainfall leaches calcium from the soil. And so the default assumption for most gardeners should be that their soil is slightly too acidic, not too alkaline. And a single annual lime application in autumn is usually sufficient to maintain the ideal range. But you cannot manage what you do not measure. And if you have never tested your pH, do it this week before you plant anything. Because if your soil is at 5.5, everything you plant in April is going to struggle no matter how good your seeds are, no matter how perfect your transplants are, and no matter how much compost you added. Mistake number 5 is failing to understand the difference between soil structure and soil fertility, and this is the deepest mistake, the one that separates gardeners who struggle year after year from gardeners who build soil that improves with every season. Because most gardeners think about their soil only in terms of fertility. How much nitrogen does it have? How much phosphorus? How much potassium? And they try to solve every soil problem by adding more nutrients, more fertilizer, more amendments, more supplements, when the real problem is not fertility, it is structure. Soil structure is the physical arrangement of soil particles into aggregates. Little clumps of particles that are bound together by fungal threads, bacterial secretions, and organic matter, creating a crumbly, porous architecture that allows water to drain freely, air to circulate, and roots to penetrate easily. Good soil structure feels like chocolate cake crumbs. It is dark, it is loose, it holds its shape when squeezed, but crumbles easily when poked. It has a rich earthy smell from the geosmin produced by actinomycete bacteria, and it is full of visible channels and pores at every depth. Poor soil structure is the opposite. It is either dense and sticky like modeling clay when wet, or brick hard and cracked when dry. It sheds water rather than absorbing it. It has a pale, lifeless color. It smells of nothing or of sulfur, and it feels hostile to roots because it is. And the critical insight that Seymour understood, and that most modern gardening advice has almost forgotten, is that soil structure cannot be fixed with fertilizer. You can pour all the nutrients in the world into structurally damaged soil and the plants will still struggle. Because without adequate pore space, roots cannot access those nutrients. Without oxygen in the soil pores, the beneficial aerobic bacteria that release nutrients cannot function. Without the physical architecture of well-structured soil, nothing works as it should. The primary driver of soil structure is organic matter, specifically the continuous decomposition of organic matter by soil organisms, which produces humus, the dark stable compound that binds soil particles into aggregates. And the mistake that destroys soil structure is the same mistake that most gardeners are making right now in April. They are digging. They are rototilling. They are inverting the soil layers, exposing deep soil to the surface, burying surface organic matter, destroying the fungal networks that thread through the top 6 inches of a healthy soil. And they are doing this in the name of soil preparation. Seymour's solution, which aligns completely with what we now know from modern soil science, was to minimize soil disturbance and maximize organic matter return. He built what he called deep beds. Fixed raised growing areas that were never walked on, and were dressed each season with a 2-inch layer of well-rotted compost on the surface without any digging at all in established beds. And over years, the combination of surface compost, root activity, earthworm action, and undisturbed fungal networks built soil in his permanent beds that was biologically alive, structurally complex, and profoundly fertile. He did not manufacture this soil. He allowed it to build itself by giving it the conditions it needed. Organic matter on the surface, no compaction, no inversion. And time, the practical fix for April, is this. Stop digging beds that are already established. If your beds have been cultivated for more than 2 years, and you have been adding compost annually, they do not need digging. The soil life is already doing the cultivation for you, and every time you dig, you set it back. Instead, apply a 2-inch layer of your best compost across the surface of the bed right now. Water it in if the weather is dry, and let it sit. The earthworms will pull it down within 6 weeks, and the soil beneath will be better for it. If you have a new bed on ground that has never been cultivated, or if you are converting lawn to garden, this is the one situation where initial cultivation makes sense. Use a broad fork or a spade to break the surface and incorporate the first dressing of organic matter. But after that first cultivation, switch to no-dig and stay there, because the single most important thing you can do for your soil over the long term is to stop disturbing it and start feeding it. And if your beds are compacted from years of foot traffic or rototilling, the fastest fix is a broad fork used vertically, pushed in as deep as it goes, levered gently in 4 directions, and pulled out without inverting the soil. This shatters the compacted zone and opens air channels without destroying the layered structure of the soil profile. Do this at 12-inch intervals across the affected bed. Top dress with compost and give the soil 6 weeks before planting into it. That is enough time for the biological activity stimulated by the aeration and the compost to begin rebuilding the aggregate structure. Here is what all 5 of these mistakes have in common. They are mistakes of impatience. The cold soil mistake is about planting before the soil is biologically ready. The wet soil mistake is about cultivating before the soil is physically ready. The amendment order mistake is about adding things before you understand the chemistry. The pH mistake is about planting before you know what you are planting into. And the structure mistake is about disturbing a system that works when you leave it alone. And April is the month when impatience costs gardeners the most. Because April feels like go time. The seed catalogs have been sitting on your table since January. The transplants you started in February are getting root-bound on your windowsill. The neighbors are out in their gardens, and you feel like you are falling behind. But the gardeners who are rushing into their beds right now in April, planting into cold, wet soil, piling amendments on without testing, digging beds they do not need to dig, those gardeners are going to spend June and July wondering why their plants are struggling. While the gardeners who do the soil preparation work this week, who test the temperature, who squeeze the soil, who test the pH, who apply the right amendments in the right order, and who leave established beds undisturbed, those gardeners will be harvesting in June and July, while their impatient neighbors are still waiting for plants that never properly established. This is the system. Test before you plant. Fix what needs fixing. Leave alone what does not. And build soil every season that is better than the season before. There is only one thing standing between you and abundance this season, and it is not the seeds, it is not the weather. It is not the variety. It is the 5 minutes it takes right now to go outside, push a thermometer into your soil, squeeze a handful of dirt and decide whether you are actually ready to plant. Do not plant yet. Do the work. Then plant once.